Cool. So who's working on or has worked on a multilingual Drupal project? You guys, usually it's a combination of people that are exasperated and are here to try to figure out how to do it better, or they're contemplating a job, they've got a potential new customer, new project, trying to figure out what to do. So I always like to ask that question. The focus today really is on the contrast between the way things have been in Drupal 7 and the way things are going to be in Drupal 8, which are just, the difference is so vast that it's really, really, really a great thing. Probably the first few projects you work on, I would imagine, over the next year or so are going to be on Drupal 7. But Drupal 8 is a huge, huge improvement. I'm Bull Weber. I'm Director of Sales for the East for LINGOTEK. We're a translation and services company based in Utah, actually, but offices all over the place. So as I said, the purpose of this session is really sort of an intro to Drupal 8 with respect to multilingual content management, how it is that it's Drupal, that it's different than Drupal 7. So this is basically what we'll go through. We'll talk on a high level about what the challenges are with managing multilingual content, which many of you are, I'm sure, familiar with already. What the solution, and then the point really is to compare the landscape, the Drupal 7 landscape with the Drupal 8 landscape with respect to multilingual content. I need my glasses here. Okay, so fundamentally, what's the issue with multilingual content? Really what the issue is, it has to do with agility, it has to do with publishing agility. These days, international customers that are deployed across a multitude of languages, or even just a few languages, it's one thing to translate a website, it's one thing to deploy that translated content, but the real rub then becomes, how do I manage this process going forward? The rate at which content is being created is accelerating like crazy, and traditional kinds of offline processes for identifying content that needs to be translated, yanking it out of the website, sending it off by email or FTP to some process into which there's no visibility, getting it back, only now it's in Russian, you don't speak Russian, how do I deploy this on the website, all those sorts of things. Hi, no worries, just thought you had a question or something. That's really the process. These days with websites, as we all know, it's a continuous publishing kind of a model. Content is not, static really in any way anymore. So what can be done to manage the process of keeping multilingual content in sync over time? The traditional methods of cutting and pasting and so on fail. And that's really where LINGOTEK comes in. We've got a technology that consists of a Drupal module, not to mention plugins to 20 or 30 other business applications that connect to a cloud-based platform where any type of translation workflow can occur. So content can be identified automatically, sent up to the cloud, translated by whatever process you choose to utilize, whether it's people, machines, some combination thereof, then inserted back into the website. We've been around for a number of years, since Drupal 6 in the Drupal community. We've got, I was just looking today, north of 43,000 downloads of our module, around 700 sites currently reporting. We've got our RC1 module is in place and available as of just about a week ago. We worked with the core team on Drupal 8 for about a year. So bottom line is we're way into Drupal. We're baked into a number of distros that you're familiar with. We're now in the Acquia demo framework, for example. So we can certainly help we can certainly help you if you've got a Drupal problem, and or a multilingual issue, and I don't just mean with respect to any sort of a paid engagement. We spend a lot of time working in the community, and so there are a lot of resources available. So the contrast that I was talking about, well, let's talk for a minute about Drupal 7, how translation was done in Drupal 7. It really was kind of a difficult thing. Translation, honestly, to be frank, was kind of an afterthought with Drupal 7. Some things were difficult to translate consistently. Drupal 7 was multilingual capable, but core wasn't totally translatable, and in English was really the only true source language. So what that created the need for, and something that I think is particularly cool about the Drupal community, is that the community needed multilingual. So what happened? This is basically a dependency graph of the main modules related to doing multilingual. The green ones are in 7 core, and all the rest are contrib. LingoTek's module is one of these ones, one of these contrib ones. So this gives you a good idea of the kind of band-aid approach that was required in Drupal 7 to manage multilingual stuff and make everything work. For any Drupal 7 website, there are 20 or more modules that are required. For example, the LingoTek Drupal 7 module basically was a bolt-on to the I18N suite that further enhanced some of the capabilities around that. And it can be super confusing if you're new to multilingual. It works very well. I mean, we've had Drupal 7 module for, ever since Drupal 7 released, and it's very mature and so on. But it's challenging. Here's an example of some of the issues, right? Taxonomy translation was a great one. I18N versus entity. Both were young, both were active. Who wins? It's kind of a funny slide, but I18N can translate some taxonomy terms. Entity translation can translate fieldable taxonomy terms. And both were in their infancy when they were contributed. They were not in 7 core. And so things were really difficult. There were a lot of decisions. We had to create a lot of conditional logic to handle taxonomy term translation for our customers. We did it, but it was a challenging thing to do. Menu translation was another thing that was difficult to handle in D7. Our developers looked at the options. They basically chose the translate and localize method to have a symmetric experience. So that's what we recommend that our Drupal 7 customers work with. Fan favorite, right? Field collections, very, very cool, very, very popular. There are over 100,000 sites using field collections. It's easy to set up. It's fun to work with. It's basically very cool. But it's very, very fragile to translate, difficult to translate. The module was clearly not created with multilingual in mind. So we added some conditional code to help and make it possible to translate field collections. But it was, that's a very popular module that was very difficult to translate. So if you've got a Drupal 7 site, you're thinking about how to translate it. Simplest thing to do to get it ready, it can be done through a couple of drush commands, easy enough to find. You can do it that way, or you can install our module and go through a process of, you'll find it will show you all of the dependencies that it has on other internationalization modules, and you can kind of go through it step by step that way. But comparing that to Drupal 8 it's absolutely night and day. Drupal 8 spent a lot of time, the core team spent a lot of time making multilingual just a fundamental aspect of core. I'm sure all of you guys know Gabor Hochi or know of him. He took on a massive project with respect to multilingual in Drupal 8. There are over 1,000 contributors. A number of folks at LingoTek of our devs worked extremely hard on that. Thousands of development hours. There are over 500 issues. And the result is this. Totally night and day. Completely simpler way to manage multilingual because it is fully baked into just the bedrock core of D8. So it's just, it's light years ahead. Basically, there are 4 modules to the pillar: language, interface, content, and config. All of the functionality to make sites multilingual is now core in D8. So let's look at those. The first pillar right out of the gate is language. right? You establish an instance, the first thing you have to do is choose a language. This will be the source language of the site. It's a great thing to be able to have the source language be anything, other than English. It helps the community. It helps everyone who's building sites with a baseline source code outside of English. Interface strings, the code is built into each module. Interface text, titles, descriptions, text on buttons, all of that stuff is now native to core. Interface translation strings built into the code of each module. Available translations in your chosen site language are just automatically downloaded from localized.drupal.org during the setup process. So it's so much more simple. All of the site content in D8 is marked as specific language when it's created. Here you can see blog posts, new articles. The content translation module provides the UI to get content into all of the different languages. With respect to configuration, config translation has been standardized. Much of the I18N suite of modules is put into core. It eliminates so much guesswork. Taxonomy terms aren't even a part of config translation anymore. They're officially a part of entity translation. So, the difference between what was and honestly what is, because Drupal 8 it'll be a few years before it's super broadly adopted in most builds, but this will give you an idea of what's coming. The contrast just could not be more stark, and I mean that in the best possible way. All of the kinks haven't been worked out. But the module for Drupal 8 is our module for Drupal 8 is going to bolt on top of a so much simpler set of baseline modular requirements. The fact that multilingual is built into core is going to be absolutely huge. And if you're building a module on top of a pile of other conflicting modules, you run into problems. And that problem will largely be eliminated. So very, very, very exciting. We get asked a lot at LingoTek, well, if this is going to happen, how are you guys going to still have a business? And the basic answer to that question is that what we do really has to do mostly with what we do with translation up in the cloud. We have connectors to, 25 or 30 different business applications, and Drupal is one of them. And our real focus is integrating all of those things. For most large enterprise customers, and you guys that have worked on large projects probably already have encountered this, there are, sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of content sources within that organization's ecosystem of applications. They're using Marketo for marketing automation. The website is in Drupal. Maybe they have internal websites and intranets and things that are in SharePoint or WordPress or something like that. A key point of leverage for LingoTek is that we can make it possible to centralize translation in the cloud and then connect up all of these other things so that translation can be shared across all of those different applications. Typically, translations are bought, on a legacy basis, they've been bought in silos. Marketing buys their stuff. The website people buy their stuff. There's a lot of redundant spending. So this enables, for LingoTek, this really enables us to focus on our core business, which is integration. Quick look at what Drupal 8 looks like. This is purely just a screenshot demo, but this is what you'll encounter. As I said, our RC1 module is available now as of about a week ago, so you can play with this if you would like. So here's a D8 module. All of the content titles can be translated. This is an example node in English. You'll see if you've got the module installed, there's now the LingoTek module, there's now a translate tab. If you hit the translate tab for any node, basically an operation gets added to upload that node for translation. And when you do that, it connects up to our SaaS-based platform. As you can see, just basically to run you through this circularly, up goes the content. All of the markup is stripped off of it as that happens. It enters the TMS, and there It can be translated in any number of ways depending upon the type of content it is. If it's a social content, for example, it can be machine translated, sent back down, and immediately deployed on the website. I know I enjoy reading comments on articles all the time, and you can usually tell, like if you're reading a news story or an editorial or something, and you start reading the comments, you can tell when they've been machine translated, but it's actually really cool because you see usually there'll be the location of the commenter, and it'll be some guy in Shanghai that read this New York Times article or whatever it is in Chinese and then commented in Chinese, and it's redeployed instantly in English. So there are some use cases for machines. But generally, machine translation is thought of as a translator's tool. So a common workflow that improves quality without having the full cost of complete human translation is to set up a workflow where the content comes up, it gets passed through a machine translation engine, and then the next step in the process is a human translator reads the result and fixes it, because there will be clunky syntax things. It's about 70 to 80% correct generally. And sometimes, just because of the way the syntax works in different languages, a translator will look at some things and rewrite the sentence completely. But it's possible to get to a decent, acceptable quality level doing it that way. You can, of course, also have content professionally translated. LingoTek has, we have a network of 5,000 translators that you can professionally translate. The platform will spin up a quote for you for any project. If you have an existing agency that you like having translate stuff, we'll train them up on our translation platform, and they can do it that way. But the overarching point is, new content gets introduced or content is changed, the system will detect that automatically, and it will kick off whatever workflow that you've set up to send the content up to the cloud-based platform. It gets translated there. It gets compared to anything that's previously been translated, which is recorded. That's called translation memories. So over time, as your translation memory database grows, the percentage of content that gets sent up that matches something that's already been translated and approved will grow. And that can immediately be sent back down as an approved translation. So money gets saved over time. But however it gets translated, it comes back down. All of the markup that was stripped off over here is reinserted, and it goes right back where it lives in Drupal. Yes, ma'am?
What would be the relative amount of time that it takes to get a halfway decent translation?
It depends largely on the process that you're using. Machine translations will turn around a node in under a minute generally. It'll just go up, and we don't have our own translation engines. We just have integrations of Google Translate and Microsoft Translator and 4 or 5 other ones. There's one called Asia Online that's particularly good with the Asian languages. So if it's machines, it's almost instantaneous that it'll be back. And you can configure, within Drupal, you can configure it, and there are dashboards and things where you can either see that there's a completed translation, click a button to publish it, or you can have it automatically publish. And likewise, you can see if there's new content that hasn't been translated, that's out of sync. There are various graphs and things, and you can send it. Or you can automate both of those steps and have it be that whenever new content gets translated, it gets sent back. So machine is instantaneous. If there are people involved, if it's machine with a human reviewer, throughputs are like typically 5,000 words a day. And if it's full professional translation, it's more like 2,500 words a day. So it depends on the process largely.
I don't know how many stories that is. I guess you'd have to figure out if it was a news story, the average length of each story, but the day.
Well, and remember also this is one translator. So we have large customers like Cisco and Intel and stuff like that. They send up tens of thousands of words a day, and we just simply scale up a team of translators that can turn it around in accordance with what their requirements are, which vary by content type. If it's some sort of a bulletin that they need back in 2 hours, then it goes to a team of like 10 people who can crank it out that quickly. If it's an article, then it's okay for it to take a couple of days. We use fewer people. You reach a point, if you scale too large a team of translators up, you begin to erode consistency, even though you're using things like applying glossaries and translation memories and stuff. But the more people involved, the more you run the risk of eroding consistency. So
I didn't realize that you might need multiple people. Say for a news story, you know, it's got like that many words, however many it is.
Then you'd probably just use
500. So let's say if you just use the example of one article and you need an eyeball on it. Would it still take like about a day to get that result?
It would likely be quicker. With most of our customers that have specific sort of sensitivities and requirements for the turnaround time, we'll put together an ecosystem of assets, and we'll do an SLA with them to guarantee that we'll turn it around in a certain amount of time. So, you know, basically the short answer is it can be translated as quickly as it needs to be within reason through whatever process. And if it's human translation, then it just requires more people so that the throughputs are higher.
I mean, I think the machine with a reviewer sounds like a great option.
Yeah, and the other thing is it's less expensive. Like LingoTek offers, you know, machine translation with a professional reviewer, and also professional translation, which also gets a professional reviewer. And we work with contractors because we use in-country people all over the world for whatever language it is. And it's less expensive. The acronym is PEMT, Post-Edited Machine Translation. The review step is less expensive. So if all you have to pay for is the reviewer, it's about half the cost of having full professional translation. So it's becoming increasingly popular with our customers to do it that way because it's faster and it's less expensive. There's still going to be a level of content that's like their top tier nuanced marketing stuff that really has to be localized well. It doesn't have to just be in Arabic, for example. It has to be in Gulf Arabic or Egyptian Arabic or Libyan. The dialects are slightly different. There's always going to be a place for professional translation where you really want people to do it. But there is a broad middle swath of content that really doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, and it's much cheaper and faster to market if you do post-edited machines.
Do you review your own translations?
Sure.
Okay, so you get the story in, it gets machine translated. The person on staff who speaks the language, they just fix it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we typically do with new customers, is we audit what resources do you have available, what multilingual employees do you have. If it's a huge global company, they've got marketing departments all over the world, and to the extent they can have their employees participate in the process, as long as it doesn't take them away from their jobs too much, if it's just another task, they utilize them.
And the term for assisted translation is called machine.
Post-edited machine translation, yeah, PEMT. We typically call it. I'm sorry, there was a question in the back I just couldn't get to. We'll come next to you. Oh, okay.
My question is, using your module, suppose I publish a story that's going to take a couple days to translate. So I publish it in English. It shows up in English. But I have maybe a French website, a French version of the site as well. Does that not appear on the French site until it's gone through the translation process, or does it exist in English until it gets translated?
No, it does not appear until it's translated. Then it deploys on the French website. Yeah. I mean, you can configure it otherwise to have it go everywhere, but in most cases, yeah. Exactly. I mean, in some cases, it can be worse to deploy clunky, clumsy content than it can to wait. But typically the scenario would be it gets deployed in the source content. The module detects that, hey, there's this new source content. It needs to go into the other target languages, and it kicks off that process. And as soon as it's done, it gets deployed in the other languages. Okay?
Is this just like generating Excel FF files, and is that how it kind of does the parsing and getting all the wrapper code removed? Like, you know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about, but I'm not sure I know the answer to that question.
I bet it is.
I would think it's.
One experience with this was that basically when you're ready, you create an Excel FF file, and that's apparently kind of the standard in the translation industry. So they pass that along to somebody to deal with it, and then when it comes back, they just basically are filling back in the blanks between the divs and the, you know, whatever other markup is there. So
Yeah,
that's what it is.
probably. And, you know, because it pulls all the markup out and then it reinserts it.
About you guys a month ago. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah.
My life would be so much better.
Really? I'm sorry to hear that.
It's too late now, though.
We've been here.
You know, who knows? We'll see.
How do you, as for me, for example, I don't know Chinese, but I know another language. I'm Romanian.
Okay.
And I sometimes see translations that are made in Romanian by machines that are completely
Awful,
outdated.
right? Yeah.
Right? So how do I know, I don't know Chinese, how do I know that that translation in Chinese is not something completely, you know, out of whack?
Right. Well, the way to do it is to, somewhere in the process, translation and review process, have someone who speaks whichever Chinese it is, simplified, traditional, review it. You definitely want to have a human review at some point. What LingoTek is largely about is automating all of these macro steps that aren't actual content translation or review. The translation can happen with a machine, but it's absolutely required to have a human review at some point. But it's very simple. You know, it's a cloud-based platform, so if you set it up with a review step, what will happen is content will come up, machines will translate it, then the system will fire off an email to whoever the reviewer is. They click a link, it spins up this SaaS workbench platform, says here's the source content, here it is translated, and they can fix it. And they can see all the fuzzy matches with translation memory, so they can leverage previously translated stuff to maintain consistency. So it's very easy for them to do. They do that translation, they click save, you know, and off it goes to the next step in the process. Sometimes after that, since they're just reviewing the text, sometimes after that it's what's called an in-context review, where the next reviewer can actually see what it looks like on the website to make sure that it looks correct on the page, and then they click next and it moves along.
Does the module also capture changes to the, like, there's the content, but also maybe I change a field label? You know, it captures that.
Yes. Yep, all that stuff. Blocks, taxonomies, field labels, all of those sorts of things. Okay, so anyway, I kind of forgot where I was. I think we're in the middle of, yeah. So we sent up content through the Drupal 8 process. So once it's uploaded, you can pick the target languages that you want. You know, depending upon which they are. In this case, German and Spanish. So then it goes through the workflow that is depicted on this slide, and it's totally configurable by you. Some combination of machines and people and translation memories. And then it comes back down. And this, you know, here's what it looks like, you know, translated. And it's pretty much as simple as that. There's a dashboard that will enable you to see some interesting things. You know, like these are basically progress bars that will show how far along in the process your content is that's been sent up to the platform. Depending upon how it's being translated, it'll be different amounts of time. As I mentioned, the machines will, you know, crank it back in a minute, but if it's going through a series of review steps, you'll be able to see where it is. There's another place where you can click on it and you can see who the individual people are that are working on it. If somebody's kind of dropped the ball, you can ping them with an alert and say, dude, you know, you need to finish this because we've got to get it deployed, that sort of thing. But the key thing is that in the old way of doing things, you send content off to an agency, you really have no visibility into where they are in the process. You know, it could be weeks away from coming back. Here you can really see what's happening with it, which phase of the workflow it's in, and how soon it's going to be back.
I don't want to get too up in the weeds into this, but how do you deal with like pricing? Because I mean, typically translations by the word. So if you get, I mean, you've got a new node that needs to be translated. Like, does somebody get alerted? They have to sign off on that because somebody's got approved budget, or, you know, things like that.
Yeah, typically we do that sort of in advance. And this is true if you know, we do human translation, but a lot of our customers use different agencies that they like to use, and they're just, to us, they're software customers. In our case, what we do is we work with the customer to try to estimate the amount of translation they're going to do in a given quarter, say. And they'll open a PO for that amount. And what we'll do is we'll then, there's a meter that'll run that will determine how much they've translated over each period, whether it's a month or a quarter, and we'll just invoice them at whatever cadence.
You don't manage that in your...
No, not within there. We do. There is some analysis that you can see how many words you've translated, but we do an agreement about the per word rate ahead of time. One thing that's cool though is, as I mentioned, you don't pay for repetition. So everything that gets recorded or that gets translated gets recorded. It's then in the TM vault. Any content that comes up to be translated, the first thing that happens is it gets compared to all previous translations. And whenever there's 100% hit, and it's kind of by the phrase, that doesn't get retranslated, so they don't pay. So over time, the cost goes down of professional translation, because most websites, they do in fact, no matter how broadly, talk about some sort of universe of a specific content area, and eventually a lot of things have been said. So sort of where we are with our Drupal 8, all content entities, translation of them is now supported. We're almost done with all config things. We expect our Drupal 8 module to be fully compatible with the feature set in Drupal 7, which is very robust. It's been, we've had a Drupal 7 module for almost 3 years. And like I said, almost 50,000 downloads. So we're excited that by the end of the year, we're going to have a very robust module associated with whichever release candidate is out at that time. So lastly, just a little bit about us. The big thing that we do, it's kind of the bigger picture, as I was mentioning before, is that translation is just one little piece of this huge thing that our customers are doing, but it's gotten to be a pain point because of the speed and agility of content creation, the velocity that it needs to be deployed, and the amount of content. So we help them accelerate the velocity of their localization processes, and we help them share content out across their other platforms. So thinking of us, the technologies in the middle, the enterprise application connectors, upper left, global solutions is the translation services piece. But this is really the key takeaway, right? The modules there, the website, the Drupal website on the top. Anytime any new content is introduced, it gets round-tripped through a very rapid process that's highly controllable, into which you have a lot of visibility, and it comes right back down and gets inserted into the website. And I may have a slide for this, I can't remember, I'm going to skip a couple things. If you think about in an organization, the website generally falls under the sort of sales and marketing bucket, but typically they're using a lot of these other things for a lot of different things. And by putting all of their multilingual content into a singular web-based repository, it can be shared across all of these other places. I mean, we have customers, like CA Technologies as a customer, they spend about $12 million a year on translation. We saved them $3 million last year on their translation, just because so many different parts of the organization were translating the same darn things, because they all have their own budgets and they all have their own content, but a lot of it really, really overlapped.
About the shared translations, the translation memory, is that per customer, or say if you're translating something on a particular topic that someone else has already written on, will the translation memory affect that separate customer?
No, each customer has their own. I think it's not a mistake that we call those TM vaults, because it's their IP, it's their intellectual property, it's their stuff. So they're not contributing. I mean, it's a decent question in Drupal, right? Because it's a big community thing. But no, for the customers, the enterprise customers, their content is their own intellectual property. So it shares across all of their constellation of applications, but it doesn't get shared with anybody externally.
Will you be addressing just translation, how it's different in Drupal 8, separate from LingoTek, or was your presentation all about the LingoTek?
Now, I apologize for that. There's a little bit too much kind of about LingoTek. The point of the prezo is how much easier it's going to be in Drupal 8. If you think back to that slide that was that big dependency kind of tumbleweed thing that was all of the things in core and then all of the things in contrib that were required to make multilingual work. Now it's going to be so much simpler. And I guess, you know, the reason all this comes to mind is because it frees us up so much. We spent so much time with our Drupal 7 module making sure it was compatible with all of these other modules, and then a hot new module would come out that everybody was using, but it wasn't necessarily designed with multilingual in mind. So we would have to, to fire drill some sort of a way to make it work. Now every module that gets created is going to get created with multilingual in mind, because multilingual is totally a part of core, and it has to, right? And that's the big difference, and and that's what leads to, for LingoTek, that's what leads us to be able to talk about, all of the advantages that we can provide. And I apologize if this has gotten a little bit too salesy. I realize this is a development thing. Again, I'm a sales guy. I kind of parachuted in here because the guy who was coming had to go to the UK this week. But these are just more depictions of how this can work, how everything can be shared across all of the different platforms that they have. Another thing is, we have an open API. We have a dev zone with an open API. So people are writing connectors to all kinds of different business applications. If you have that capability, either at the company that you work at or yourself, our system receives north of 500,000 API calls every day, and it's a lot of them are from Drupal, but a lot of them are from all sorts of convoluted applications that that we don't even know anything about. We've got about 30 connectors that we or our partners have written, but there's an open API that's a deep RESTful API that makes it possible to write really deep integrations into the system. So that's just sort of an FYI for developers. Just lastly, kind of a NASCAR slide. Some of our customers. One that's here today, Manhattan Associates, is a joint customer that we have with our friends at Media Current. We do tons of work with agencies. If any of you work at an agency and are not familiar with LingoTek, we would love to get involved. We think of ourselves as kind of a killer subcontractor, but the agencies are the general. They're building the house. When the time comes to to do the plumbing or the wiring or the drywall or something, we can come down the fireman's pole and totally help you handle that. You can bring us into your engagements with your customers. We're very good at operating in a subordinate way around your projects. So if you're interested in talking about projects, talking about partnering up, we would love to do that. We have a rev share plan and all those sorts of things. I think we've been Q&Aing, but if anybody has any other questions, I think we're a little bit early. I'm happy to talk some more.
Do you know if the module handles web form stuff? Like web form components?
I don't know that. Give me your card. I'll find out and I'll send you an email.
If you had the people on staff to do the translations,
Mm-hmm.
and you weren't really worried so much about the translation itself, but just managing the publication of it,
Mm-hmm.
is this product useful in that way? For the deploy or for the review and
Well,
get it to different people.
They're two kind of distinct things, right? So we're a software company, so we work on the platform and our connectors like Drupal, but then we're also a translation agency. So that side of the house is focused exclusively on just translation tasks. We have translators and project managers in-house, and when a job comes in from our software and we're responsible for getting it translated, we have either internal people that do some language sets, or we have contractors that do some of the more unusual languages. So a project manager internally at LingoTek would get an email, they'd spin up the platform, they'd assign the work to somebody that's been pre-vetted for that particular language, and often there's a subject matter expertise requirement as well. If it's about aerodynamics or medical or something like that, we'll assign the project, it'll get translated, and when it comes back to the internal project manager, they'll then pass it back out to the customer, whatever the next step is in the workflow, and usually it's a customer review of some sort.
Well, I guess what I was thinking is, what if the customer, like she was talking about, like say Chinese or something, they know the Chinese, they can translate it into the English, but there's just all these different people that need to review things.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start to add multiple languages, and maybe some need to be translated, but others don't need to be translated.
Mhm.
They just need to be sent to the right place.
Sure. That's totally configurable by language. So if it's a website that's in 5 languages, in some languages, an internal person can translate it. Other languages, it has to go to some external entity to translate and then be reviewed internally. The workflows are set up with drag and drop boxes to just make sure that the content passes through whatever sort of a translation and review process the customer wants for that particular language and for that particular content type. And then it arrives back at the site.
The module provides, does the module itself have a cost involved?
No.
Or is the service
The module, of course, is free. Everything's free on Drupal, right? But it's basically a deep integration into our SaaS-based translation management system. And we do license that on an annual SaaS basis, like any other SaaS product. It's licensed. And how it's licensed depends on a lot of different aspects.
You can start working with the module.
Absolutely.
Figure out how it works and do your demo and all of that.
Mm-hmm. And you can, to an extent, you can use the platform, because one thing that we give to the community is free machine translation via our integrations. So as a development tool, a cool thing to do is to just send your entire site up to the system and have it machine translated into whatever the target is for the project. Have it all come back in Russian and populate the site. And that's going to break some things. You're going to find some things were not wrapped in the T function, and you're going to find these wildly complex German nouns that are in menus that are now blown out. So it's a way to sort of establish a punch list when you're prepping a site for the target language. A great way to do that, we call that pseudo-localization. But if you're working on a project and the client is thinking about Finnish or Arabic, which is a right-to-left language, and you want to get your arms around how, and you're trying to design a site that will be adaptive to all these different languages and needs to, some languages, the same, this much English will be this much Swahili or whatever it is. It's a great thing to do, to just round trip it up to the TMS, Translation Management System, get it translated, reinsert it, and just sort of see what you got, see how it's going to look. There's a button once you do that and it comes back down and you see it on the website. There's a little LINGOTEK logo, which is this little sort of thing like this. If you click on it, it will spin up the little editing platform that is a part of the TMS, and this is still in the sort of freemium version. So you can fix some things if they're wildly inaccurate. If you're trying to create a prototype for a customer of what their site would look like in French, you can do that. Round trip it in, and machine translate it. Whatever's screwed up, maybe fix some of it or whatever, get it presentable, show it to them, say, look, huge caveat here. We realize the quality of the translation is lousy, but this is what the site would look like in Arabic or Korean or something. And obviously, one of the steps in the process would be to secure high quality translations. But this is essentially, from a technical standpoint, this is a way that it could work and that you could manage it over time.
You can see where, with labels, like you say,
Mm-hmm.
French is typically, in Canadian French is typically, X% larger than the English equivalent.
Yep.
So you have to make sure that your labels
Mm-hmm.
aren't wrapping around, so they affect the design.
Yeah. I mean, we totally recommend for you guys working on projects, slap the module into a dev box, start translating into different stuff, and just make sure that the design that you're doing allots for the flexibility required for that. It's an important consideration. It's totally free. Cool? World of beers. Thanks, guys. Thank you for coming. I'll hope to have a beer with some of you tonight. We can talk some more.